Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Revis. I'm the Cultural Arts Coordinator for the City of Suffolk, and we're here to introduce the award winners for the 37th Annual Juried Photography Exhibit taking place in 2021. We're very excited for this exhibit. Some of you might remember that our photography exhibit last year was the one that got stuck in the building, unfortunately, when we had to close because of the pandemic. We were able to have the opening reception in person, and then about a week later, it got closed. Luckily, all of the artists were very understanding, and we were able to do a virtual component for that exhibit. So a virtual video that went out to all the artists, and we were able to spread it that way. But it was a bit of a learning curve, and then here we are a year later. We're having an in-person exhibit. We're very excited, but again, we are having virtual components, which is what we're doing today for our awards announcement. And we're so excited today to have Carl Gailey, our juror, for this year's exhibit to talk to us about the awards that he selected, what kind of went into creating this exhibit, a little bit about himself, and a little bit about his photographic knowledge. So we're really excited for that. In this video, we'll do kind of an introduction with Carl. We'll go through some different techniques and some of his ideas for the exhibit, and then we'll announce the award winners, starting with the honorable mentions and then going to the best in show. So yeah, Carl, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, so we've actually known each other for a little bit. You were actually in the first exhibit that I ever created, kind of from conception all the way through display. I was very lucky to have you in that and some of your really interesting photographs. So what are some things that the people might want to know about your own experience with photography, how you got into it? You do some really interesting conservation photography. Could you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yes, I have been doing photography ever since I was a young boy. And when I really started to get into it in a big way was when I was in the Army. Stationed in Vietnam, I bought my first 35 millimeter camera and photographed the whole year I was in country. But I never saw any of the images until I came home because I always mailed my images back to my mom and had my dad have them processed. So there was an album waiting for me when I got home. And when I got back, I just was looking at the images and having a lot of great memories. But I also thought, wow, I'd like to do this for a living. And I continued to photograph. And luckily, my last few months in the Army, I was, my roommate was an art major. So he introduced me to the dark room. And I have no art background whatsoever to begin with. And so Bill introduced me to the dark room. And unfortunately, because of some respiratory issues, I had a challenging time in the dark room.
Yeah.
So anyway, once I was discharged from the service, I spent that summer traveling across Italy, photographing, visiting museums and galleries, enjoying the art all over Italy, and of course, visiting some family that I have there. And when I came back, I made the decision to go to art school, which unfortunately never happened because life happened. Met a girl, fell in love, started a family. And that's how I started. And then about 7 years later, life happened again, and I put my cameras down until I remarried and had a new family. And it was kind of funny when I got back into it. It was, maybe 15 years later. And my mother insisted that I pick up my cameras and photograph my 8-month-old daughter because I had created canvas portraits of my 2 oldest daughters, and she had them hanging in her living room. So I had to take a picture. So I picked up my camera again, and that's when it started in 1988. And after shooting and picking up that camera and getting that whole desire back in that, wanting to do photography, by 1991, I was turning pro. And what I decided was, my goal when I first started was, I wanted to be published and I wanted to have my work accepted as fine art. And I went on in 91. I had just moved to Winston-Salem. And I think when I look at my photography career, there was a lot of perseverance, a lot of rejection, and there was also a lot of luck involved because I made some decisions that were, the right decisions at the right time. And like I said, a lot of it had to do with just persevering and accepting rejection. And there is a lot of rejection in the art world.
Yes.
So I became in my second go around with photography, I decided that I wanted to do nature photography. I've always loved the outdoors. And in 1995, I applied for a regional artist grant. And at that time, it was called the Emerging Artist Grant. And I received it from the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Arts Council to do my first book, Vision Quest. And it was photographing the Roanoke River Basin in eastern North Carolina. And it came about because I had been doing some volunteer work with the Nature Conservancy. So as I worked on that project, the whole idea of photographing that book was the Roanoke River Basin had just been designated one of the last great places of the Nature Conservancy. But being, a flexible person, which you have to be sometimes, I had all these plans and doing it a certain way. What ended up happening was the project kind of had a life of its own, meeting different people, and I started working with different organizations, and I started getting contact by organizations. Like one was the Roanoke River Basin Association, which at the time, I don't know if your water supply, but there was a controversy because Virginia Beach had been in a loss with the state of North Carolina for 20 years, wanting to build a water pipeline from Lake Gaston to Virginia Beach. And immediately the Nature Conservancy people says, stay out of that. We don't want that in the book because we have, we don't get political. They like to do sort of behind the scenes environmental work. They don't want to be up in your face and aggressive and push it, So I agreed with that. But that was one of the reasons that I started with this project. And then other organizations came to play, like Roanoke River Partners, which I am still active with and made some great friendships. So my conservation photography came about quite by accident. And one thing led to another.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And speaking of your books, you did make a second one, and if anyone's interested in those, we do have a copy of both at the gallery that's open for perusal. So if you'd like to see them in person, we have them here at the gallery, and we're really excited about that. So Carl, what are some things that you look for when jurying an exhibit?
Well, of course, being a nature photographer, I'm always attracted to the images of the natural world. But a lot of my conservation work has made me more of a documentary style photographer. When I was working on a project in 2009, documenting mountaintop removal of coal up in West Virginia and Kentucky. So what I look for initially in the way I do, this is probably my 20th exhibit that I've been a juror for. And I go through the exhibit, and I've learned over the course of time that I like to look at the images maybe 6 or 7 different times, go away from it, come back and choose. And I find that I'm always changing my mind. But what I look for is something that grabs me right away, and something that when I get done reviewing those images for the first time, those images stick in my head, in my memory. So whenever I go back to review the images, I'm looking for those images. And that's kind of where how I make some of my decisions, especially on the award winners.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there anything that you particularly see that you think takes away from an image, or anything that you think not necessarily kicks it out of the running, but it might take it out of the running for an award?
Sometimes one of the things, there are a couple of things, and of course I won't see this. A lot of the shows that I've juried, I've picked the images, and then I had the option, once the artwork actually arrived, to either accept it or reject it for the show. Because sometimes, especially now in this digital world that we live in, it can look a lot better on screen than it does printed. And then, framing can be distracting. But I think another thing that's distracting, and while it's good for maybe commercial work, having your name or address or, any kind of printing on the print itself. If you're being in a fine art exhibit, in my opinion, I would prefer to just see the image. Now, signing the mat is fine, but having a distraction, even when I look at images online and reviewing things on Instagram, I kind of cringe when I see good photographers paste their name across it for fear someone's going to steal it. I know that happens, but if it's small enough resolution, you don't have to worry about that. So I prefer just not seeing your name on the print itself. But I don't discredit some, there are a few images. And, the other thing is I don't know, is it on the actual print? So I didn't make any judgments during this show. But if you have a choice, I would prefer not seeing it. And that is, like I said, here's one thing, and I want to make a point about this, about my choices for the show. Art's very subjective. And my breakout image that started my career was a picture of a red maple tree in fog up on the Blue Ridge Parkway. And I knew it was a good shot. I just felt it in my gut. And what I ended up doing, I submitted it to Blue Ridge Country Magazine for their calendar that year. And, they have a nice circulation, but it was promptly rejected. And so I turned around and submitted it to Sierra Club calendars, and it got accepted. So here, this small regional magazine, all of a sudden it went international because of, not letting the rejection make me feel bad. So any of you, you're allowed to get angry with me. You're allowed to say, well, that was a good shot. I don't know why you didn't pick mine. Go for it. I totally agree with you. Be stubborn like I am and be persistent and just keep going for it. That's what
Yeah, well, thank you. I think, that's very important to know, because we've had, in the time that I've been here, you're the third juror, and it changes every single year. It's so subjective. They're completely different exhibits every single year. So that's very important. Thank you. So are there any trends, Carl, that you see coming up in photography that you're interested in, or anything you want to talk about?
Well, since my photography career, at least the commercial end of it, is winding down, and now it's more personal projects that I work on. The one thing I did embrace was the digital age. And like I said before, when I first got introduced to photography, I couldn't go into the dark room because it just affected my breathing, my lungs. But the digital world, now I work on a computer. And a lot of, like that, I made a lot of good decisions. And, when digital started coming on, I knew I wanted to learn Photoshop. And I was fortunate enough to be near a community college that offered a certificate program in computer graphics. So they taught 2 design courses, 2 Photoshop courses, a Quark Express class, and 1 in Adobe Illustrator. And I went through that program back before digital cameras ever came out. So when the digital world happened, I was already had a foot in the door. And then I also went to work right after that for a graphics company. So not only did I have a background and understand Photoshop, and I learned in version 2.0, not CC, Photoshop 2.0. So, the transition to digital was not as challenging for me as it was for some of my other fellow photographers. And I think what also helped in my photography was the fact that since I was submitting to a lot of magazines and calendar companies and shooting film, I was used to composing in the camera. And today's trend tends to be to shoot, because we have so many megapixels on these cameras, we can shoot anything and then we just crop it to make a nice image out of it. But I think to improve your photography, if you learn to compose in the camera, to have that image, that the final image right there when you pull it up on the screen, makes you a much better photographer. So the trend that's happening today, and one of the reasons that I'm slowing down, is the fact that digital is being more and more accepted and requested by some of the conservation groups that I work with. And I personally don't want to learn digital at my age and at this point in my career. So I leave that to you young guys and girls. But yeah, so but I think, if you can embrace digital and learn to edit, that's where a lot of the conservation groups that I work with, like the Southern Environmental Law Center, that's most of their requests these days. That's what's happening.
Yeah. And it's also getting really hard to find or gain access to darkrooms if you're wanting to develop the photographs yourself.
Yeah, right. So the digital printers, between the cameras we have today and the printers that you can purchase for your home, the printers are relatively inexpensive compared to photography equipment. The ink will make you poor, but the paper.
Yes, that's true.
But,
thank you.
Yeah, I was going one last thing.
Sure.
When I did buy my first good photo printer, it made me feel complete as an artist, because I was, when I was shooting film, I had to rely on the local labs to print my work. And now it just made me feel complete, because I was able to, it was my vision that I was printing. And I think that's important as you progress as an artist.
Yeah, you were able to see your concept from start to finish, to get the final piece out of it.
Right.
Is there anything that stuck out to you, or anything that you want to talk about from the pool of entries, or what you created for the exhibit?
Yes, there were a number of images that I really loved. And, there were a few things that I looked for in an image. And, one image that comes to mind, and I can't remember offhand the name of the artist, but it was a street scene in Rome. And I looked at that image and it reminded me of when I traveled through Italy back in 1970. And, the different expressions, if you look at everybody's face and what they're doing, and the first thing that grabbed me was the priest with his earbuds in and looking at his phone. But the only thing, and I understand in a shot like this, I love that shot, but the only thing that bothered me with it was the feet were cut off a little bit. Now, I do understand, being a nature photographer, that when you have moving subjects and people running and you're doing a grab shot, you get the shot first. And, and I cut feet off and do things all the time. But, if you do have time and you do have a camera with a lot of pixels, it doesn't hurt to back off a little bit. And, that's one time I don't mind cropping a little to make it a little tighter image. But I just wish I would have seen more toes in that shot. And like I said before, one of the other things that, there were a few images. Actually, there may have been one or two that I didn't choose that actually had timestamps in them. I don't want to see the time and date on it, on your image when you're printing it. And like I said before, I don't want to see someone's name, and it just looks too commercial to me. But all in all, and here's to the landscape photographers. One of the things that I like, I look for immediately in a landscape photo is, as my dear friend Donna Eaton says, she does edge patrol. And I look for anything that's distracting in the corners. So if you have one of the things that I like are images, landscape images that are tack sharp from front to rear. And if there was a blurry bush in the bottom right-hand corner or a branch hanging down from the tree, that's just, if my eye's drawn to it and away from the subject, I find that distracting and is just something to learn to clean up. Like I said, we're all in this digital world now, so it's easy to remove things or crop things out if you have to. But when you're composing in the camera and you're using a tripod, if you look for those things while you're composing the image, you can avoid a lot of the work you have to do in post-production.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's good I think it's an interesting concept to point out because composition is so important for all forms of art. But when you're painting a picture, obviously you get to control exactly where things are going, with your paintbrush.
And that's the argument I always have with painters who say, you photographers have it easy because, you just have to click it and you got it, and we for hours paint and paint. I says, but you put in the piece what you want. We have to take what's there. So, anyway.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think it's hard sometimes because we have the history of looking at the great American landscape paintings, like Hudson River School and stuff like that. But those were complete composites. They did not exist. It wasn't a landscape like they did plein air and they painted exactly what they saw. Like they were able to create just these idyllic images. So I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because the Hudson River School was my inspiration in a lot of my work. The writings of the period of Emerson and Thoreau in the painters from that time.
Okay, so now we're going to begin the awards announcements for the exhibit. We're going to start, like I said earlier, with the honorable mentions and run through the best in show. So let's get started. Okay, so for our first honorable mention, the award goes to Michael Wade with The Mystery House. Carl, can you let us know a little bit about why you chose this image?
Well, when I saw this image and actually a few of the other images that he had submitted, the first thing that came to my mind is, where are these? And I want to go with him when he goes photograph them because they look so amazing.
For honorable mention number 2, we have Jeffrey Smith, Innocent Troublemaker.
Yeah, I love the title. And being a father of 4 daughters, I know what it's like to have troublemakers. And it just grabbed me. And I love the green and the pink in the glasses. And I just can imagine this young person is just a lot of fun. That's what grabbed me. And again, it's well exposed. It's nice and sharp. And I keep talking about sharpness, but there is a time where soft focus comes into play, and it's very, useful.
So for our third honorable mention, we have Gary Hess with Bridge of Memories.
Yeah. And I like this one because, the cameras I use these days are Fuji cameras, and I can shoot in JPEG and RAW. So I will use a black and white mode. There's a lot of different black and white modes that I can. So I end up with a black and white image and a raw image. So I have my choice of color in black and white. So a lot of times I do have both types of images. So I love black and white. And just the leading lines into this one, and again, it's nice and sharp. You know, you can read some of the names, and it just drew me right into this image. So
Yeah.
Things that helped me choose it.
Yeah, well, thank you. And for our final honorable mention, we have Patricia Illman with Living, Breathing Pines.
Yeah. And this is one of those images that kind of jumped out at me, and I remembered I love the subtle colors. I love the way the light plays on the trees. And then again, we are in this digital age, so I would love to know how she, you know, created this image. I know it looked like some was done with textures and in Photoshop, but that is the world we live in. And since there were no restrictions put on me in choosing images, you know, I thought this would be a great addition to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, for third place, we have Paula Morse with Amish Pulling Team.
Again, both of the images that she submitted were tack sharp. I tend to have a lot of chaos in my images because shooting here on the East Coast, you're in close forest, but I love the fact that these horses are coming through this cornfield. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is that piece of corn or grass or corn stalk in that horse's mouth. There is that side of me that always loves to laugh, and that one just made me go, okay, Force is just like the old farmer with that bit of straw in his mouth chewing on it. All it needed was a straw hat to complete it, but I love the image.
Yeah, no, it is really great. Second place, we have Danis Doles and Jayla.
Yeah, Jayla just jumped out at me, and those eyes. How can you not love those eyes? And all the images that this artist submitted were great. But this one, you know, just the way the light plays on the face and on the fingertips, I just thought it just draws you right in. There's no distractions, and it's a great shot.
So for our best in show this year, we have Bonnie Horn and Forest Fungi in the Fall.
Yeah. And here is where I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting myself about sharp images, but the part that needed to be tack sharp was, and I just love the way the leaves looked, you know, on the mushrooms, the selective focus. The mushrooms were the subject, and they were tack sharp. I love the way the one branch that was on the ground in front of us. I assume she didn't place any of these, but some artists or some photographers are notorious for placing leaves in certain spots. But I just love the colors. I love the composition. And I just love the way the background and the foreground were soft. So you could focus right on the subject, where the fall fungi. So that's it. And this was that image, as I went through all of them, this one was the one that popped out and said, you know, I looked for that all 6 times. You know, that's the one I couldn't get out of my mind, and that's why I chose it as best in show.
Yeah, thank you so much, and congratulations to all of the artists. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Carl, for being our juror this year and for creating our exhibit and for going over the award winners with me today. I really appreciate it. And our exhibit will be up at the Suffolk Art Gallery from March 6th through April 16th. So you can come and visit in person. I will create a virtual exhibit to go out if you don't feel like coming in person or you're unable to. But yeah, please stop by if you're able to, and we'd love to see you. Thanks. Have a nice day.